My father kicked me out to give my room to my golden child brother, but when I discovered he stole $200K from his company, I exposed them both and destroyed their lives forever. I'm 18 years old, just finished high school, and honestly, I never thought my life would end up like this. I mean, living with my maternal grandparents while my father and half-brother are facing criminal charges for fraud, but here we are. The thing is, all of this started like 8 months ago, when my father Raymond basically threw me out on the street to make room for my perfect brother Trevor and his dysfunctional little family. And what happened after that? Well, let's just say karma is real and sometimes it comes with interest. I guess I should start from the beginning so this makes sense. My mom Andrea died when I was 11. Pancreatic cancer. It was horrible and fast. Like within 6 months she was gone. Trevor is my dad's son from his first wife, so technically he's my half-brother. He's 24 now, 6 years older than me. For as long as I can remember, my dad always treated him like he was the perfect son, you know? Trevor could do anything, and Dad would find a way to justify it or ignore it, while I don't know, felt like everything I did was wrong or wasn't enough. When Mom was alive, she kind of balanced things out. She defended me, made me feel like I mattered. But when she died, everything got a lot worse. For years I lived in that house, feeling like I was a burden, basically. Raymond worked at a tech company, like manager of something important. Made good money, I guess, because we lived comfortably. But emotionally, he was a total mess. Trevor had already moved out years ago. He got married to Courtney when he was like 22. She's one of those who spends all day on Instagram taking pictures of herself in expensive clothes and saying she's an influencer, even though she has like 3,000 followers. And they had Blake, their son, who's like 2.5 now. The truth is, Trevor never had a stable job. He always had these business plans that never worked out. And Courtney flatly refused to work because, according to her, taking care of Blake was a full-time job, as if all the other mothers in the world don't work and take care of kids at the same time. So one day, it was in March, I think, I got home from school and Raymond was sitting in the living room with that serious face he'd make when he was going to tell me something I wasn't going to like. He said, "Sit down, Oliver. We need to talk." And I already knew something bad was coming, because he never talked to me that way, unless it was to scold me for something or to give me bad news. He sat me down there and basically told me that Trevor and his family were moving back into the house because they were having financial problems, that they'd lost their apartment or something like that. He didn't give me many details, really, and that they needed my room because it was the biggest one after his. I sat there like processing what I'd just heard. And I asked him, "Well, where am I going to sleep?" And he, with the most serious face in the world, told me it was going to have to leave, that it was time for me to learn to be independent anyway, that I was 18, and that a lot of people my age already lived alone. I reminded him that I was still in high school, that I had like 3 months left until graduation, that I didn't have a job or savings, and he literally told me that wasn't his problem, that Trevor needed the space more than I did because he had a family to support. I couldn't believe it. Seriously. Sitting there, I was thinking, this can't really be happening. I told him I had nowhere to go, that he couldn't just kick me out like that, and he got furious, like I'd never seen him so angry with me. And he yelled at me that I was ungrateful, that he'd given me a roof and food for years, and it was time for me to stop being a burden. A burden. Those were his exact words. He told me I had a week to pack my things and get out, and that if I didn't, he was going to call the police himself to have me removed as a trespasser. I spent that week in like a state of shock, basically functioning on autopilot. I called my maternal grandparents, Constance and Howard, who live like an hour away, and told them what was happening. They were furious. They wanted to come talk to Raymond, but I asked them not to because I knew it would only make things worse, and they told me I could move in with them no problem, that I would always have a home with them. When Mom died, they wanted me to go live with them, but Raymond refused. I think more out of pride than anything else. And now, after all these years, I was finally going to accept their offer. Trevor and Courtney showed up like on the 3rd day with all their stuff. I mean, they didn't even wait for me to leave, and their attitude was like it was the most normal thing in the world. Courtney walked into my room, where I was still packing, and started measuring the walls to see where she was going to put Blake's furniture, talking on the phone about how she was going to decorate the Space. She didn't even say hello or ask how I was. Trevor didn't say anything either, like he acted like I was invisible. And Blake was running around the whole house screaming while they weren't paying him any attention. The day I left, Raymond wasn't even home. He'd left early for work, I guess. So I just put my stuff in my grandmother's car, who had come for me, took one last look at the house where I grew up, where I spent my last years with my mom, and left. I remember I cried the whole way to my grandparents' house. Not so much about leaving the house, but about the betrayal, you know? About feeling like my own father was discarding me like garbage to replace me with the son he actually cared about. Constance and Howard were incredible from the beginning. They gave me the guest room, which was pretty big and comfortable. They told me it was going to be my room for as long as I needed, that I could stay after graduation if I wanted while I went to college. Basically, they made me feel loved for the first time in years. Grandma Constance cooked my favorite meals. Grandpa Howard helped me set up my desk and drove me to school when I needed it because their house was farther away. I finished high school living with them, graduated in June, and honestly it was the best period of my life despite everything that had happened. During those first months, Raymond didn't contact me even once. Not a message, not a call, nothing. It was like I'd ceased to exist to him. My Aunt Deborah, my mom's sister, who's always been like the family gossip but in a good way because she's always up to date on everything, kept me updated on what was happening at my dad's house. She told me that Trevor didn't work, that he spent all day playing video games or watching TV, that Courtney spent all her time buying stuff online they couldn't afford, that Raymond was covering all their expenses, food, Blake's diapers, basically everything, and that the house was a total disaster because Courtney didn't clean and Trevor didn't help with anything either. Then, like in July, like a month and a half after he kicked me out, Raymond called me. I saw his name on the screen and almost didn't answer, but something told me to do it. I answered and he didn't even greet me properly. Went straight to the point, asked me if my grandparents had given me money, if I had access to their bank accounts or something like that. I asked him why, and he told me he needed me to ask them for a loan, that Trevor and Courtney needed help with some expenses and that he couldn't cover it all alone anymore. I laughed. I literally laughed in his face. I said, "Really? You kick me out of your house and now you want me to ask my grandparents for money for your favorite son?" And he hung up on me, just like that. But things got interesting like 2 weeks later. Turns out my mom had a very close friend from college, his name is Damien, who's now the CEO of a pretty big tech company. And coincidentally, he's Raymond's boss. Or, well, he was his boss at that time. Damien always kept in touch with my grandparents after Mom died. He'd come visit sometimes, ask me how I was doing, that kind of thing. One day he showed up at my grandparents' house. He looked serious and asked to speak with me alone. He took me to a nearby coffee shop and asked me if I knew what Trevor was doing at my dad's company. I told him I didn't know Trevor worked there, and Damien explained that Raymond had gotten him a position like 4 months ago. Easy job in human resources. Basically processing papers and handling some administrative stuff. And then he dropped the bomb. He told me they'd discovered that Trevor had been stealing money from the company accounts, like thousands of dollars over months, using his access to the systems to make small transfers to his personal account, thinking no one would notice because the amounts were relatively small, but obviously it all adds up. I sat there unable to process what he was telling me. Damien explained that they had all the evidence, that it was super clear Trevor had done it, and that Raymond was desperate trying to cover all this up, offering to pay the money back as long as they didn't press charges. He asked me if my dad or Trevor had contacted me recently, and I told him about the call, asking me for money. Damien nodded, like that made sense, and told me they were probably going to try to contact me again to prepare myself, and he was right. Like 2 days later, Raymond showed up at my grandparents' house with Trevor. I was in my room when I heard the doorbell. I went downstairs and saw them there at the door. My grandma, Constance, blocking their entrance with that "don't mess with me" face. When they saw me, they started talking at the same time. Raymond saying we needed to talk as a family, Trevor looking super nervous and pale. I told them to come in because I didn't want to make a scene outside where the neighbors could see. We sat down in the living room and Raymond started with his speech, basically saying there had been a misunderstanding at work, that Trevor had made a mistake with some accounts but it hadn't been intentional, that it was all the fault of a confusing system and lack of proper training. Trevor was sitting there nodding like a puppet, adding that yes, it had been an accident, that he would never steal on purpose. And then Raymond dropped what they'd really come to tell me, that Damien had known me since I was a kid, that I could talk to him and explain that Trevor wasn't a bad person, that he just needed a second chance, that if I interceded for him, maybe Damien would reconsider pressing charges. I looked at both of them, unable to believe what I was hearing. This man had kicked me out of his house months ago, had called me a burden, had chosen Trevor over me my whole life, and now he was coming to ask me to save his perfect son from the consequences of his own actions. I asked them if they were serious, if they really thought I was going to help them after everything they'd done to me, and Raymond had the nerve to tell me we were family, that family helps each other in difficult times. I stood up from that couch and told them exactly what I thought. I told them that Trevor hadn't made any mistake, that he'd deliberately stolen money for months, that he'd betrayed the trust of the company and our father, and that I wasn't going to lift a finger to help him. I told Raymond that he'd made it clear I wasn't part of his family when he kicked me out to give my room to Trevor, that he'd chosen his side a long time ago, and now he had to live with the consequences of that choice. Trevor started begging, literally with tears in his eyes, saying he was going to go to jail, that he was going to lose everything, that please don't let that happen. And I told him he should have thought about that before stealing thousands of dollars. Raymond got furious, started yelling at me that I was selfish, that I was destroying my own family out of spite, that my mother would be disappointed in me. And that's what made me explode completely. I yelled at him not to dare mention my mom, that she would be disappointed in him for how he'd treated me all these years, for how he'd made me feel like I didn't matter, for kicking me out like I was trash. I told them to leave my grandparents' house and to never contact me again, and my grandpa Howard literally had to escort them to the door because Raymond kept yelling. The next few days were crazy. Raymond called me from different numbers because I'd blocked his, sent me long text messages alternating between threats and pleas, showed up at my grandparents' house 2 more times, but they wouldn't let him in. Trevor also tried to contact me through social media, but I blocked him on everything. It was like they'd finally understood they had a serious problem, and I was their last hope, which was pathetic considering how they'd treated me. Damien had to intervene eventually. He told Raymond that if he continued harassing me, he was going to add that to the charges, to leave me alone or face legal consequences in addition to the ones already coming for the fraud. That calmed things down for a while, but my Aunt Deborah told me Raymond was basically having a nervous breakdown, that at work everyone already knew what Trevor had done, that Raymond's reputation was destroyed because he'd been the one who recommended Trevor for the position. And then I discovered something else, something that made all this even worse. Turns out Trevor hadn't just been stealing money from the company accounts. He'd also been using the corporate credit card to buy personal stuff, like expensive clothes for Courtney, expensive toys for Blake, meals at costly restaurants. They'd even gone away for a weekend to a luxury hotel, all paid for with company money. Damien showed me the statements when I went to visit him at his office one afternoon, and it was ridiculous. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars in completely unnecessary purchases. I asked Damien what was going to happen, and he told me there was no turning back now, that the board of directors was pushing to press criminal charges, that the fraud was too obvious and the amount too large to let it go. He told me Raymond was going to lose his job, that Trevor was definitely going to face charges, and that they'd probably both end up with criminal records at least. He asked me how I felt about it, and I told him the truth. That part of me felt bad because technically they were my family, but that a bigger part felt like this was exactly what they deserved. I decided to do something that was probably petty, but honestly made me feel better. I compiled all the information I had about Trevor's purchases, the photos Courtney had posted on Instagram of all the expensive stuff they'd bought in recent months, updates about their outings to expensive restaurants, everything. I sent Courtney an email with all this evidence and a message that basically said, "This is what your husband did with stolen money. Thought you should know." I didn't expect her to respond, but she did. Sent me a long, angry message saying I was a liar, that Trevor would never do something like that I was trying to destroy their family out of jealousy. But like a week later, my Aunt Deborah told me that Courtney had packed all her things and left Raymond's house with Blake, that she'd moved in with her parents in another state, that she was furious with Trevor because she'd finally understood that everything he'd bought her was with stolen money. Apparently, when Courtney confronted Trevor, he admitted everything to her, thinking she'd understand. But she basically told him he was a criminal and an idiot, and that she didn't want Blake growing up with a father like that. The marriage fell apart in a matter of days. I also found out, I'm not proud of this, but I don't regret it either. I sent anonymous messages to several of Trevor's friends with links to articles about the case that had already started appearing in local business news, naming him specifically. Within days, all his friends knew what he'd done. His social life was completely destroyed. No one wanted to associate with him. I saw on his social media, before he made it private, people confronting him in the comments. Old friends saying he was a disgrace. Basically, his reputation was ruined. Damien officially pressed charges like in September. Raymond was fired from the company after working there for almost 20 years. His reputation in the industry destroyed. No other company wanting to hire him because everyone knew he'd tried to cover up his son's fraud. Trevor is facing multiple criminal charges: fraud, theft, embezzlement of corporate funds. His lawyer told him he'll probably end up with at least a year or two in prison if he's lucky. More, if the judge decides to make an example of him. My aunt, Deborah, told me Raymond had to sell the house because he couldn't pay the mortgage anymore without his salary, that he moved to a small apartment in a not-so-good area, that he basically lost everything. Trevor is living with him while waiting for trial, the two of them in that tiny apartment, their relationship probably as tense as you can imagine. Courtney filed divorce papers like a month ago. She's not even trying to reconcile. She just wants to get Blake away from this whole mess as much as possible. And me, well, I stayed living with my grandparents. I ended up applying to local universities so I wouldn't have to go far from them. I got accepted into a pretty good business program. Damien offered me a paid internship at his company, working in a completely different department, obviously. He says he saw something in me that reminds him of my mom, her work ethic, her integrity. It's ironic in a way. The son Raymond discarded ended up working for his ex-boss while the son he preferred is facing criminal charges. Sometimes Raymond still tries to contact me, occasional messages from numbers I don't recognize, always with the same theme, that I ruined his life, that I could have prevented all this if I'd helped. That family should stick together. But it doesn't affect me like before. I just delete them without reading more than the first lines. My Aunt Deborah says, Raymond tells people, I'm the villain of the story, that I betrayed my own family, that I'm vindictive and cruel. But she and other relatives on my mom's side know the truth. They know how he treated me for years. They know he made the decision to kick me out, and now he has to live with the consequences of his actions and Trevor's. Last week was my birthday. I turned 19. My grandparents made me a special dinner. Damien and his wife came, some cousins from my mom's side too. It was small but meaningful, surrounded by people who really love me and care about me. Raymond didn't try to contact me. That day, not even a message, and I realized his absence didn't hurt like before. I'd finally moved on. I don't know what's going to happen with Raymond and Trevor. If Trevor's going to end up in prison or if he manages some kind of deal. If Raymond will ever find another job or if he'll end up with a permanently ruined reputation. Part of me, a very small part if I'm honest, feels something like pity when I think about how far they fell. But then I remember that day in March when they told me to pack my things and leave. When they called me a burden, when they chose Trevor and his family over me without thinking twice, and that pity disappears pretty quickly. My grandparents tell me that someday maybe I can forgive, that holding resentment only hurts me, and maybe they're right. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean letting them back into my life. It doesn't mean forgetting what they did. I'm starting college in January, Damien says. My internship can become a part-time job while I study. My grandparents are helping me with tuition, along with some scholarships I got. My life is finally heading towards something good, something I built myself with the help of people who really care about me. Sometimes I wonder what my mom would think about all this, if she'd be proud of how I handled the situation or if she'd think I should have been more compassionate. I think she'd understand. She knew better than anyone how Raymond favored Trevor, how he made me feel less than. I think she'd tell me it's okay to set boundaries, that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family, that I deserve to be surrounded by people who value me. The last time I saw Trevor was like 2 months ago. I saw him at the supermarket by chance. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, looked like 10 years older. He saw me too. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw in his face that he wanted to say something, maybe. Apologize or maybe insult me. I don't know. But I just looked away and kept walking, because I had nothing left to say to him, nothing to hear from him. We're basically strangers now, and that's okay. I guess the moral of all this, if there is one, is that actions have consequences and you can't treat people like garbage and then expect them to help you when things get tough. Raymond and Trevor made their choices, made their decisions, and now they're living with the results. I made my choices too. I chose my well-being over blind loyalty to a family that never valued me. And I don't regret it one bit.